My name is Arun Majumdar. It's an honor to say that I'm the Dean of the Stanford Doerr School of Sustainability. I just want to welcome all the faculty, the students, the staff, the special guests, and the Doerr School Advisory Council members who are here. Today's event is part of a Big Ideas in Sustainability series, which brings global thought leaders to Stanford to engage the entire university community in sustainability discussions. We launched this Big Idea series last fall with Bill Gates, and today we have pleased to carry forward with two distinguished guests. Before we move forward, just a few announcements. I'd like to share that we as a university recognize and value the rights of individuals to express their views, which is why we do not permit disruption of an event such as today's. Freedom of speech is a core value at Stanford. Our goal today is to create a respectful space for the exchange of ideas. Those who engage in the disruption of this event will be issued a warning, and if the warning is not respected, may be also asked to leave. Moving forward, we have two distinguished guests. John Doerr is an engineer, is a venture capitalist, and the chair of Kleiner Perkins. He's the author of two bestsellers, including Speed and Scale, an action plan for solving a climate crisis now. A pioneer in Silicon Valley's clean tech movement, he has invested in zero emissions technologies for nearly 2 decades. In 2022, John and his wife Anne collaborated with Stanford to launch the Stanford Doerr School of Sustainability. We have a guest, former Secretary of State John Kerry. John Doerr is going to introduce him, but I'd just like to say he's a hero of mine. His bravery in combat during Vietnam War earned him the Silver Star and the Bronze Star. Please give a big, warm Stanford welcome to Secretary John Kerry and John Doerr. We do have a little surprise. Before we start our program, we are pleased to share a special video message from Condoleezza Rice, former Secretary of State and member of the Stanford Doerr School of Sustainability Advisory Council.
Hello, everyone. I wish I could be there with you in person this afternoon for this important conversation. The power of partnerships cannot be overstated as we work to address the climate crisis. John Kerry and John Doerr are among the leading thinkers in this area, and their commitment continues to inspire. I know something about John Kerry's accomplishments as Secretary of State. In fact, I know a little bit about what it means to be Secretary of State, and I know how well John did that job. And then to go on to advise and to work in diplomacy to help the world address the climate crisis was an extraordinary effort. Thank you, John, for that. And of course, I'm inspired by the generosity of my good friends John and Ann Doerr and their efforts leading to the launch of the Stanford Doerr Sustainability School. I'm grateful to John and John for tackling this topic and for continuing to use their power for good. Finally, I want to welcome my fellow SDSS Advisory Council members who are on campus today. Stanford's volunteers are essential to our success, and I'm honored to work with you to help the Doerr School advance global collaboration and action around climate and sustainability. I am, of course, very honored to be a part of this advisory council. When Arun asked me to do it, I said yes right away, because this is the kind of effort for which Stanford is uniquely positioned to do the research on the technologies and the policies and the changes that we must all make to realize our goal of addressing the problems of climate change. So thank you all for participating in this conversation about big ideas and sustainability.
So Arun, thank you for the introduction and for arranging for Secretary Rice to join us. And to the students, faculty, and friends who are here for this second Big Ideas discussion in the second year of the Sustainability School. I'm thrilled beyond words to have with us someone I've known since 1998. That's the former US Senator from Massachusetts and chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, our 68th Secretary of State, the first ever presidential envoy for climate, a Vietnam veteran, Time Magazine's Earth Award winner, a diplomat extraordinaire, Presidential Medal of Freedom winner, just last week, correct? The highest civilian honor that the government can give in our great nation. A diehard Boston sports fan and guitar-playing grandfather. Join me in welcoming John Kerry. Thank you, John, for your service to our country, Secretary Kerry, and for your leadership in the Paris Agreement, the Inflation Reduction Act, and so many global accomplishments on climate. There are too many to name, and they wouldn't have happened without your leadership. I had the really good fortune to interview you for this book that Ryan Pashantzer and I wrote called Speed and Scale. And while it shows amazing progress in some countries, we still have a long way to go, and we'll cover that today. As you've told me, the next decisive decade is going to require all of us to really double down on the climate agenda. But before we get into that, obviously the world is watching Gaza very closely, especially on our campuses. And as a veteran of the Middle East peace process, I wonder how you're viewing the current situation.
Well, if you want to see the scars, I'll show them to you. First of all, thank you, all of you. It's a great privilege for me to be here on the campus. I have such respect for this campus, as everybody does, and love what you're doing, but more importantly, love what this man and Ani have done. It's just so extraordinary to have created this school, which has already generated efforts on a number of campuses around the country as a result of the example that Stanford has set. So I was privileged to be here the day I think the school was first announced, and now I'm here with John, and it couldn't be better. His book says it all. I mean, it says what we have to do, but it's great to talk about sort of why we're having difficulty, where we're not, and what the promise is of where we need to go. So I'm really happy to be here. You want me to share a thought or two on the policy part of Gaza?
Right, of the Israeli-Palestine, Gaza.
So one of the realities of dealing with Israel and Gaza and the region, because it's all jumbled up together, is that it is not easy. It's complicated. It's a very complicated global challenge, and one of the most intractable of all foreign policy efforts. And I spent many more years as a senator on the Foreign Relations Committee and as chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee. I went many a time to conferences there, met with King Abdullah, with Bibi, who I've known for a long time. And I pursued that peace process while Bibi was the prime minister and I was Secretary of State, and learned an awful lot that you only can learn by being on the ground and feeling the tensions and the dynamics of the region. But I begin any conversation about that by saying this. I've seen a lot of things. I saw war, as Dean mentioned, and through the years, I've seen abuses of human rights, civil rights, and so forth. What happened on October 7th is one of the most grisly, depraved, horrendous, inexcusable, frantic, racist, just deeply disturbing events that I've ever seen. What happened to women, particularly, and I don't want to go into all the details, but you know them, I hope. You should, because it's critical to understand where a very legitimate fury comes from. That said, there is a fury that has grown up through the years of disappointment in the West Bank and on the Oslo Accords and on the constant promises and on the corruption that has existed within the PA. And of course, Hamas is a terrorist organization and refuses to behave as one would want. And so it's very complicated. And then you have a further complication, which most people are not aware of. And I ran headlong into this. The religious right in Israel has gained a power that it didn't have previously. And they are, and I brought this to President Obama's attention. I actually put together a series of maps because nobody had put them together and nobody could see what was happening. But Israel has had a tension for years. I remember talking to Prime Minister Shimon Peres about it, and to Rabin when he was alive and so forth. There's just always been a tension in Israeli society over that religious right and its goals. And the goals have transformed over the last years. When the Oslo Accords were put in place, the population of settlers in the West Bank was about 100,000, somewhere in that vicinity. The population today is close to 500,000. And even during the war, during this war, right now, Prime Minister Netanyahu announced 13,000 plus new settlements. What's that all about? Well, I'll tell you what a lot of us have divined it is all about. It is all about the ultimate annexation and plans for the implementation of the greater Judea-Samaria that people on the right believe in. And the peace movement has been crippled over the last years to some degree in Israel. I remember I had a wonderful dinner with Shimon Peres about a month before, 3 weeks before he passed away, alone in his house in Jerusalem. And he raised a glass at the end of the meal and drank a toast. And he said, I want to drink to peace, which I know you're pursuing and I pursued so hard. I want to drink to peace. And I want to tell you, when Israel was formed and in the beginning of all of our travails, the mandate for the Palestinians was 49% of the land. He said, this is Prime Minister of Israel. He said, we are now at 21%. I believe we have enough. Pretty powerful. And unfortunately, not enough people share that belief. And people, on the right refuse to call what's happening in the West Bank an occupation. It is an occupation. There's no other word to call it. That's what it is. Mm-hmm. And they run everything. And the Palestinians don't have the right to make any decision. I remember when I came in and we were negotiating to try to get to a peace, we had an agreement to open the Allenby Bridge 24/7. We had an agreement to be able to put Watniya communication system in. We had an agreement to be able to to build a housing, and the housing was built, but no access road was ever built, so you couldn't get to the housing. The Allenby Bridge has never been open for 24/7. So I'm just sharing with you, this is complicated because nefariously, under the table, sometimes directly, there's a constant process of each side pursuing its goals on the ground by themselves. And what I think Israel needs and what the region needs is not just an organizational effort around the idea of Saudi Arabia, recognizing them and having some sort of a ground agreement. I don't think in the current context that's going to be possible without something more for the Palestinians. And so you've got to find a way to get on the table the larger global solution that people can really grab onto. And the difficulty right now is that even people who are supporting the Oslo Accords and the idea of peace have now got second thoughts because of what Hamas did. And the question is legitimately asked, can we ever feel safe with a West Bank that is a state? Now, obviously, it'd be a demilitarized state. It would have all kinds of restrictions, and in the plan that I had put on the table at a secret summit that we had with King Abdullah and Bibi and President al-Sisi of Egypt at Aqaba, Bibi walked in and said, I can't do it. This is after 3 years of work to put it together. Yeah. And we had a huge penetration of Shin Bet, Mossad, IDF into the fabric of security within the West Bank for a long period of time. So while Israel would not really be abandoned to the idea of just a state, off they go and they can do what they want, no, at least 20 years, 25 years, who knows how long, there has to be a workout of transformation. And so we have to begin to talk a whole new language about what we're trying to achieve there. And you know, I think Tony's been heroic in making the missions he's made. He was my deputy. He's very smart. I like him enormously. And we've worked together very effectively for a long time. He was on the Foreign Relations Committee too, working. But if you don't have the right tools in your hands, in your toolkit, and you don't have a ripeness, I learned, is a very critical element of foreign policy. And this just ain't ripe.
I do want to get to sustainability and climate. But
no kidding, really?
I want to, no, not kidding. But you've been a protester. What is your view of what's going on in our campuses?
I believe in protest, and I think it's a cherished right here in our country. Our country is protest. We are an experiment based on protest. The Tea Party and everything that we stood for back then was a protest against excessive power being exerted over people. And we should all be very proud of what our forebears did. But they didn't do quite as much as everybody thinks, because there's a real, as we all know, the original sin of slavery and a whole bunch of other things are wrapped up in all of that rhetoric. And we haven't always been very good about comprehending it and understanding it, honoring it. I protested when I came back from the war in Vietnam. Not initially. My first engagement was in Earth Day. I helped organize Earth Day in New England, and very proud of what we did. We brought 20 million Americans out of their homes on the same day, all protesting bad air, bad water. Los Angeles, you couldn't see across the city. New York, the same thing. You choked on air, like people are around the world today, by the way. We lose 7 million people a year to death by lung disease or bad air, et cetera, on the global basis. It's going to get worse the way we're going. So, John, I think the key is that when we protested the war, we had about 5,000, 6,000 veterans of the war dressed in their fatigues, many of them on crutches, some in wheelchairs, some with just the stumps of their limbs to show for their service. And we marched from Arlington National Cemetery up to near the Capitol, where the new addition to the museum, the National Museum Gallery of Art. And our field that we all camped in, 5,000 strong, has been taken over by the building. And they unplanted the tree we planted when we left, which we thought would be there for posterity. But Nixon wanted to kick us off and arrest us. And we took a vote, democracy at work. 100% people voted, all right, if they're going to arrest us, they arrest us. We're going to stay. And we did. We slept that Thursday night there waiting for the cops to come in, and the cops refused to do it. They just weren't going to arrest a bunch of vets. And senators started coming down and visiting with us. Teddy Kennedy came, Birch Bayh came, a bunch of senators were there. So it was very moving, very dramatic. But we knew that if we got arrested, no violence. We weren't going to do things that got in the way of other people. And today, I think that's a critical component of what people have to think about. It's totally appropriate to be furious, but you have to translate that into something that brings people to the table, doesn't push them away. When you stop traffic on a bridge or when you do this, I can understand the frustration of it, but be smarter. You're trying to, protest is supposed to be an inclusive invitation, not an exclusive rejection. And too many places right now, people have just fallen into this thing. And frankly, some of them really don't know what they're talking about. They need to learn a little more. We ran teach-ins back in the 1960s and 70s. And we really had professors, people come and talk about the history of Vietnam and what it was going on and so forth. And it was fairly educated movement in that regard, as were the other movements of that period of time. So I think, John, it's great to have a protest, but also there are rules, and you have to obey the rules. And you can rebel against the rules, but you suffer the consequences of what the rules say. And it's very simple, and I think, frankly, some of these universities have handled it not very well.
Yeah, I think it's been well handled here at Stanford. You've been an effective and tireless advocate for climate, for the planet, all the way back to the summit in Rio in 1992. And then we have COP30 coming up in Brazil, in the Amazon, in 2025. What is your perspective on what's been accomplished in the last 3 decades and what we have ahead of us?
Boy, that's a big question, John, and obviously it's the question. Yes, I was among a lot of people. My mother was an ardent environmentalist. I was impacted by that. I was really impacted by it because she got my siblings and I up at 4 in the morning to go for a nature walk in Washington. Wow.
That's impact.
That's impact event. But no, I've always been very close to appreciation for nature. I live next, not too far away. We have a summer place near Woods Hole Institute, and I grew up, in the shores of Cape Cod, dipping my toes in the water and looking for clams and respecting the wind and the forces of nature. And we haven't respected them very well on a global basis, or even here in this country. I was interested, I noted that the name of your school is the School of Sustainability. There isn't any place in the world that's living sustainably. I mean, this is the greatest task that we have. And, you can have robber baron capitalism or you can have enlightened capitalism. And we need more enlightenment and more ability to be able to invest because we can win this battle. We still can win this battle. But the journey has been far too slow, far too interrupted, far too usurped, commandeered by very powerful vested interests that do not want to give up their current power or their profits at a time when, here's the simple equation. What is the problem? This doesn't require a new algorithm from the geniuses of Stanford. It doesn't, it's very straightforward. We are burning fossil fuel without capturing the emissions. We burn fossil fuel. And we burn it to obviously power our homes, our cars, our transportation, our lights. Industry uses carbon in a reckless way in the hardest to abate sectors, concrete, cement, shipping, trucking, aviation, aluminum. There are a group of sort of industry places where we really have our work cut out for us. And I'm afraid to say that, the simple reality is we have a choice now. We human beings have a choice. The problem is human created. We are the problem. We have decided to not be serious enough about doing what stops this crisis, which is you either capture all the emissions that you're putting out there or you don't make them. That's it, folks. That is the simple choice we face. And John, in his book, Speed and Scale, has laid out brilliantly, in very clear terms, what we have to do that. We have to decarbonize. And we have to do it much faster than we are now. In the UN process, we've taken a pledge, all of us, voluntary, yes, but we've taken the pledge that we are going to have a 2030 date by which we need to try to have achieved close to a 50% reduction in emissions. And that is the prerequisite for any talk about net zero 2050. If we do not achieve the goals we've set for 2030, we do not achieve net zero 2050 because the curve is just too steep as to what you have to capture at that point to catch up to a 2050 date. And why is 2050 important and 2030 important? Because the IPCC, the chosen entity that is respected by everybody with respect to climate, has said in 2018, in a revision of their judgments made in Paris, you all, meaning anybody in a position of power, you have 12 years left within which to make and implement the key decisions that will avoid the worst consequences of the climate crisis. That's it. Everything President Biden has asked me and others to do, and everything he has proclaimed globally, is not based on a Biden philosophy or a John Kerry urging to do X, Y, and Z. It is based on science, mostly physics, mathematics, some chemistry and biology, but mostly physics. And we're ignoring it. Now, this fight took place in the 1600s and 1700s over flat Earth, and Rousseau and Voltaire had their mighty back and forth over the cause of the earthquake in Portugal, which took 40,000 lives, and the incredible impact of that, which was ultimately settled in favor of science, called the Enlightenment. You know, and it had a profound effect on sort of resolving things in favor of science and setting us on a very different course for the 1800s and the 1900s and now into the 21st century. So if you look at this, John, the job is only going to get done if we will do the things that we've said we have to do. Now in Dubai, thank God, finally, because I had the pleasure of negotiating, of leading our team in Paris, Glasgow, Sharm el-Sheikh, and then in Dubai. And there are people here who have been enormously helpful, by the way. I mean, Tom Steyer is a hero in my judgment for the ways he's gone out and tried to help make a difference. Hal Harvey is sitting there. There are many of you out here who have been in the charge. It's the only way we're going to get this done. But listen to this, please. I know I'm going on a little bit, but this is an important thing.
We're hanging on every word.
No, you're
Keep
not.
going.
Don't joke me. In Dubai, we managed to get 200 nations to act by consensus, which is what is required in the UN process, which means one nation can object and tear it apart. So we have to get 200 nations come together, and you know we got signed off on? The following. We, humans, must transition away from fossil fuels in a fair and orderly and equitable manner so as to achieve net zero 2050, which means you have to have a plan, accelerating in this decade, right now, which is the master phrase of that paragraph, because we got China at a 4-day retreat. We went to Sunnylands in California, and we got China to agree for the first time ever to include all greenhouse gases in their next target, their NDC, National Determined Contribution. And that means methane and nitrous oxide and so forth are all going to be included, and you have to have a plan. And then finally, the final phrase, according to the science. That phrase means 1.5 degrees has to be the holy grail. Now, I'm not going to kid anybody here. We're blowing through 1.5 the way we're going right now. We're heading towards about 2.5. So you want the good side? The good side is that when I took this job on in 2021, when the president created this,
Thank you.
we were heading to 4 degrees, 3.74 degrees. Now, 2.5. But what's critical to know is that the IEA said that if we do everything we promised to do in Glasgow and everything we promised to do in Sharm el-Sheikh, and now we're waiting to hear what's happened to push the curve out of Dubai. But even without Dubai, the IEA says, you do everything you said you're going to do, you can be at 1.7 degrees limit of warming, which is, boy, I mean, I'd take that, and then maybe you claw back to the 1.5. And we could claw back with the technologies that are coming online if we deploy them. We have enough technology today not to do the whole thing. We still need breakthroughs, which is why Bill Gates' breakthrough effort is so important, and John's contribution to that, and others, Hal, and people are working at it. But we have to get to a place where we are really implementing what the science says we have to do, because that's the only way we're going to get where we need to go. But I see possibilities of getting there. And if we implemented what we've promised in terms of, for instance, we created a First Movers Coalition. We have 100 of the biggest corporations in America. Google, Apple, Microsoft, FedEx, Salesforce, Ford Motor Company, General Motors, run the list. And some foreign ones, Lafarge, Holcim, Eni, Equinor. I mean, we got a lot of players in there. And they've all pledged that they're going to contribute to the creation of green market, to creating a demand signal, which we're now sending. For instance, Ford and General Motors say 10% of the steel we buy in order to make cars is now going to be green steel. And there's a plant in Sweden that's coming on, another one, there's one already on, others coming online. So people, whoa, there's a market there. This is what we have to do. I left doing the job I was doing because I believe very deeply government is not going to solve this, because we need money. Trillions of dollars have to be deployed. And it's the private sector that has that ability. And if we're going to be really serious about the climate crisis, we're going to find the financial incentives and the financial mechanisms, working with the World Bank, working with the Bezos Earth Fund and other efforts, so we create some concessionary funding and some lower interest, which is concessionary to a degree, lending, in order to create bankable projects where you have an offtake for that project with a power purchase agreement with a country and private companies, and we transition away from coal. That is absolutely critical, folks. And the great danger we face right now, 80% of all the emissions on the planet come from 20 countries. 10 of those countries have a virtuous program to try to get to net zero. We're one of them. Canada, Japan, Korea, Australia, Europe, you count them. And then there are a group of those big economies that don't want to be called anything but a developing nation, completely hiding behind the common but differentiated responsibility clause, which is part of Paris, and they're not responding. So China is about to bring 260 gigawatts of coal-fired power online, even as China, to its great credit, is developing and manufacturing and deploying more renewables than all the rest of the world put together. And guess what that's going to do? Inevitably get them to peak sooner than they've promised, the 2060 date, and they will actually have less emissions because they're going to have far more renewables than the rest of the world. So even China is sort of moving, even though they do it in a way that doesn't advertise or claim, what they're doing. And so I actually remain hopeful. I'm optimistic. We can make a difference, but we've got to mobilize the private sector by creating greater incentives. The IRA is fabulous in that regard. And what was going to be about $369 billion of tax incentive is now probably something like $1 trillion plus. It works. And believe me, I think that's the only way we win the battle.
I want to stay on the geopolitical China, India, Indonesia dimension of this problem. And you're our best negotiator. What is it going to take to partner with these nations in addressing this crisis? Do we have the framework?
We don't have the framework completely yet, no. And we have tensions. I mean, the challenge with China, and I fought this for the last 3 years, the conventional, easy political play in Washington, D.C. is to beat up on China. And unfortunately, it just doesn't get you very far. It's just not, to me, a strategy. And we have to stand back and evaluate all of the aspects of the China challenge, which are many and serious. Kim Jong-un, nuclear weapons, instability to the region, Taiwan, Uyghurs, intellectual property theft, China and the 9-dash line and the South China Sea, Hong Kong, access to the marketplace, dumping in trade. I mean, I've just listed off the top of my head a whole bunch of these things. And climate. Climate is not a bilateral issue. This was my argument to President Biden and to President Xi. And President Biden completely buys into it and wants to try to work with China and knows we have to do that. That's why we had the summit here just a few months ago, which was fairly productive. But if you don't talk to people, I mean, how can you not talk to the second largest economy in the world and one that's threatening regions? And if you don't work to try to find common ground at how you're going to resolve some of these global challenges together, you don't have a lot of hope of solving the other kinds of problems there. China is essential to any kind of real solution to the climate crisis. And I think, John, I think we ought to be conducting right now, if I had my druthers, if I was the czar who could just say, this is what we're going to do, I'd have a Manhattan Project. I met one of the folks here who was at Los Alamos. I would have a Manhattan-type project on SMRs. Why? Because if we want to keep the lead on AI, and we do, and we want to break through on the other technologies, we need power. Those data centers are going to require enormous power, which as of now, renewables are not going to be able to provide. If the choice is for them to build gas infrastructure that's going to be there for 40 years, we're gone.
We're cooked.
Totally. And that's the new currency, is out there. Look at these ads on TV. Green fuel, green gas. I mean, it's insulting because they can't capture the emissions yet. And when you sit down with some of them, and I want them to be part of them, they have to come to the table. There has to be a legitimate transition here, which is what we did achieve with the UAE. And their leadership is committed to that transition. They're investing heavily in renewables, investing in and deploying in renewables. They're investing in nuclear. They're investing in AI. They're really out there trying to create a transition. And so, and the transition, folks, is not something that people ought to be fear-mongered on. And we used to call it mau-mauing. I don't know if any of you relate to that anymore. But the fact is that the other side of this transition is so much cleaner, healthier, safer, better than what we have today. I just spoke about 7 million people dying right now. Clean air. We used to talk about polluter pays, and we always had this notion, this is pollution, folks. That's what we're talking about. Not just gas, it's pollution that kills people and is killing the earth because it's infecting the oceans in the sense that, the oceans are warmer. 90% of the heat from climate goes into the oceans. The oceans are warming so fast that you have this increased amount of moisture going into the atmosphere, which turns around and comes down in these massive rainstorms. And the weather, the warming and cooling impact creates much greater intensity to the tornadoes, the storms, the frequency. It's all related. And we're spending hundreds of billions of dollars just cleaning up the mess rather than preventing it from happening in the first place. I mean, the definition of insanity is when you continue to do something that's nuts, right, and bad for you, but you do it anyway. We've got to break out of this. And we need to have a movement that's growing around the country. One of the things John put in his book, what do you do? He's got 6 items there where we have to decarbonize, we have to respect nature, we have to fix food, those things. But the other things he says we have to do are sort of win the battle politically, get the movements doing what they're supposed to do, make the incentives we need, innovate faster, invest more. That's the key. And we're not putting enough of those tools into play right now.
What are the specific areas where you would like to see China and the U.S. cooperate?
I think we have to cooperate on methane. You now have permafrost thawing around the world in Siberia and Alaska and places, which is releasing methane that has been imprisoned in the earth for 40,000 years or so more. And that methane is what we call a fugitive gas, which is out there. It's 80 to 100 times more destructive than CO2 in the early years. In the later years, it's still 20 times more destructive than CO2. So we've got free gas just coming up out of the permafrost. We don't capture it. We don't know how. We can't yet. It's a monumental task. But we're now trying to just stop venting these gas and oil companies in Iraq, in Kurdistan, and Kurdistan, I guess, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, and other places, Russia. And I hate to say it, but in Texas and in a few places in the US, we drive by in New Jersey, there's a few plumes coming up. It's just gas being burned off. And the irony of it is, I told the president of Mexico, we did a calculation on what Mexico loses by burning, flaring, $2.8 billion a year to their budget. If they just captured it, they could sell it, which we're not pushing on it, but you know what I'm saying. So it's where we are, guys. Another insanity definition.
I tell you what, I'd like to shift gears. I've got a quick lightning round and then a set of questions that have been submitted by students.
A lightning round.
A lightning round. What's one place you wish you could go back to?
I always wish I could go back to the waters of Narshan and the Elizabeth Islands and the Martha's Vineyard and the islands and the Cape. It's bliss.
Your favorite band?
Beatles by far, but if you really want to charge folks, you can go to YouTube and you can ask for John Kerry and the Electras. And there's a hell of a garage band, 1962.
John Kerry and the Electras.
Electras, John Kerry and the Electras on YouTube. And if you get through more than 3 songs, you get a prize.
Sport, if you could only play one sport, what would that be?
I can't only play one sport, but soccer, football.
Soccer.
European football.
A favorite poet?
I played in college and I loved it, as did Tom Steyer.
A favorite poet or poem?
Favorite poem, let us go then, you and I, like a patient etherized upon a table. That's good old proof rock.
Yeah.
Thomas Stearns Eliot, love it. I don't know why I love it, but I loved it forever.
And what's your idea of a day well spent?
Sailing with the family, and then you come in at the end and you're all sitting around on the porch and the kids are running around in the beautiful light we have in New England in this time of year. You have the light longer, you have it all the time, but that's when we enjoy it.
Okay, a few questions which I've chosen. Claire Bask is a current student. She asks, do you think the current administration is doing enough to combat the effects of climate change? How would you like to see this change with the next administration?
I think President Biden has been heroic and he doesn't get credit for it. He has passed an incredible infrastructure bill which will put 500,000 charging stations out there if we ever get some of these resisting political entities that don't do the permitting that is necessary to do that. We can't take 10 years to permit a wind farm or a solar farm or so forth. So we have to speed that up. That's part of that bill. The IRA is brilliant. We have about 80 new battery companies, probably more. You're doing tremendous research here. And that's critical because we need storage. If we get storage, we can address what's called base power fears people have, and we can begin to really get the job done. So I think those are sort of the key things that we could do. And President Biden had the summit, 3 summits in the White House. We had President Xi, President Putin, the 20 countries I talked about, getting everybody to raise their ambition. He has done more than any, and I worked for President Obama, and I'm proud of what he did and what we did. But President Biden has put the gold standard out there, and we need to do a better job of getting people in the country to understand what he's done. It's been superb.
Michelle Young, who's a current student, and Stephanie Lau on the staff, posed this same question. As someone with an interdisciplinary background and soon-to-be graduates thinking about applying for jobs, how do you say they can contribute the most meaningfully and realistically to sustainability? What's the best way for ordinary citizens to move things in the right direction?
Well, the first thing to do is make sure you vote. I'm sorry to say, it's simple. You got to vote. Anybody who doesn't vote is voting for, fascism, oblivion, division. I mean, honestly. And you have to organize. I believe in what young people have the ability to do because I was one, and I know what we did. On that Earth Day I mentioned earlier, we didn't just stop with 20 million people coming out of their homes. We built a political movement. We did what John said you have to do. And we targeted the 12 worst votes in the United States Congress in 1970. We labeled them the dirty dozen. We raised money and we advertised and we went out to those districts and campaigned and organized. Peanut butter and jelly brigade, that's what people lived off, 20 people to an apartment or whatever. But they went out every day and knocked on doors and put out leaflets and worked. You know what happened? We defeated 7 of those 12 members of Congress. And as a 28-year veteran of the US Senate, I will tell you, there's nothing like watching your colleagues slinking out defeated to stiffen your spine. That's exactly what they do. And so what happened is we passed the Clean Air Act, Safe Drinking Water Act, Marine Mammal Protection Act, Coastal Zone Management Act, Endangered Species Act, and we didn't have one, we created the Environmental Protection Agency of the United States of America, and Richard Nixon, because he saw it was a voting issue, signed it into law. Folks, that's basic policy. That's what you do.
This is from Stephen Liu, another student. What do you believe can be done to increase U.S. manufacturing capacity for green energy technologies such as solar panels and batteries? Or has China won?
No, not in the long term. They haven't. They've won certainly for now. But we've tried to act on that very hard. President Biden authorized us. We put $500 million on the table with India to create a fund to be able to invest and deploy renewables. India has set a target of trying to deploy 500 gigawatts of renewables by 2030. It's a big challenge. Unfortunately, they have coal and they lose coal. And they want to keep that economy humming, as does the regime in China. Everybody, nobody wants the politics of massive unemployment and of disruption. So they're doing coal. And we've got to move faster to get off of that coal. But China, the fact is that there's a lot we could do to be able to help them. We also put $500 million into First Solar, which is going to be the largest solar plant in the world, in order to help us reestablish supply chains that we need. And the tragedy here is we were really the promoters and the designers of solar together with Germany. Germany deserves enormous credit, we deserve enormous credit. And we had an industry. And China started dumping, and the administration at that time did not do anything about it, and China stole the market. So that's one of those issues we have with them, which we have to work on. But I think that, and again, it's incentive. Do we need policies that make it easier for companies to go out and invest or for individuals to invest? Yes, we do need that. We need, the UN finance report suggests that we need $2.5 trillion to $4.5 trillion a year for the next 30 years. We're now at about 1.8 trillion of venture capital investment in the sector, in this part of the economy. We need to up that. How do you up it the fastest? By creating tax incentives, by making people feel comfortable that you're de-risking those deals so that the big money starts to go out. And then you stop being so stupid as to continue to subsidize the problem. We have $2.5 trillion of subsidy that goes to oil and gas companies. So we got to change the demand side of this, not just the supply side. You can't do it from the supply side alone. You've got to have demand change. And if we can put demand incentives in place to do it, John, we win this battle. We win it going away. And now fusion in my state of Massachusetts. As a senator, I worked hard to bring millions of dollars back to the state, to MIT, and to Commonwealth Fusion, which is now getting private capital coming in. And everybody, I went up to the accelerator here a year or so ago, see what was happening, and a palpable excitement from the scientists who see something different happening now. We've had a breakthrough on creating heat and holding the heat for this momentary period of time. Now we have to figure we can bring it to scale. They're building an enormous plant in Ayer, Massachusetts, in the old military base, and they say they're going to have the ability to make power commercially in Massachusetts about 2 or 3 years from now, somewhere in that range. And we should be putting much bigger incentives in place to do exactly that kind of thing. World War II, we managed to turn around a situation. 1943, it wasn't completely clear we would win the war. And Paul Kennedy at Yale's written a book called The Engineers of Victory. And it lauds the efforts of mid-level decision makers, people like you have here, a lot of folks here at Stanford and elsewhere, who are put to the challenge. And the challenge is, we got to have control of the air. We've got to have control of the sea. We have to get those Higgin boats onto that beach. How are we going to do that? They all did it. And by the end of the war, we were turning out one B-24 every hour, on the hour, from an old automobile plant, Lincoln, in Michigan. 1 an hour. And Liberty ships. We were building 3 Liberty ships every 2 days. That's the container ship of that period of time. So we could get the equipment over there and make it happen. We acted like we had an existential threat. We have an existential threat today, and we are not acting as if it is that. That's the difference.
And what is it going to take to change that?
It takes leadership. It takes leadership, and it takes a commitment by a broader base of Americans to want their elected officials to do this. You've got to have some permissiveness in the political process so that people, don't think they're committing political suicide by doing this. Now, right now, at this moment, we have a particular challenge in this country, and you all know it. There's no validator for the truth, fundamentally. We used to have those validators. We respected, not everybody, but we respected a certain number of people in the judiciary and the thing. Now we look at the judiciary and we say, what the hell is going on? We can't even have a trial for criminal activity. And we look around and see a sort of, the distortion level with respect to facts. No, wind turbines do not give you cancer. But, this is what we're fighting, folks. And with all the bots that are out there, there's a great benefit to some things, but social media has come with some very serious deficits that we have got to really penetrate, or our democracy can go to hell in the process of not being willing to do what we need to do. Truth matters. I always thought the New York Times Sullivan Standard regarding libel ought to require a de minimis effort to have found the truth. We used to get telephone calls at 6 in the evening where the reporter on the phone would say, hey, Senator, we understand that you've been beating up your kids and you're, a disgraceful human being. Do you have any comment? And, it was and we're going to run this story in 3 hours. Well, did you try to find out whether it's true or not? No, they don't care. We don't have a standard. It's amazing that a libel suit has been won, but it's not for a strictly public person. I am a strictly public person, and therefore a higher standard is applied to what you can say about me. I shouldn't have told you that. Yeah. Sorry. Anyway.
Final question.
Yes, sir.
In the most challenging of times, you've always looked forward. How do you maintain that North Star, that optimism? What is it? How do you maintain that? What is it to do?
Obama used to accuse me of unfettered and unwarranted optimism. I'm an optimist. I am an optimist. I really believe, if you look at where we were before this chaos in our political structure, as humanity on the planet, leaving aside the dangers of what we're doing with respect to climate. But look through history. far fewer people are dying violently today than at any time in human history, even with the war we see in Gaza and what we see. I mean, far fewer people. 30 million Russians alone in World War II, 6 million Jews, so forth. I mean, you know, women have won not the whole battle, but a lot has happened to change what women can do in places all around the world. And that's evolving, continuing to. Race, we have made some progress. It's ugly, but one of the reasons it's gotten ugly is because we're making progress. And the people who don't want that progress are panicking and feeling more threatened as a consequence. It's a side even of that progress. Science, we are curing diseases we never thought we'd be able to cure. Look at what we did with COVID. I mean, it's remarkable what we did. And if you look across science and across opportunities for people in various parts of the world, China, 450 million people have been brought out of poverty. They're traveling the world, they're consumers today. So the challenge now is not to get them to be able to travel, it's to be able to get people to live sustainably in the things they're choosing to do and in the products we provide and so forth. But that too, I believe, is going to change. So I believe change comes, and I've always been guided, you know, those of us who served, I served on a gunboat in the Mekong Delta, a skipper of a gunboat, and we were always shot at first. We were always ambushed. And when we came home, those of us who did, we lived by this, which is the title of my biography. My biography I wrote after I was secretary. It's called Every Day is Extra. And I think if you live life that way, you can be pretty optimistic. You have a right to be, anyway.
Friends, please join me in a standing ovation.
Oh, yeah, that's a great period. Command, brother.
That was great.
Thank you.